On today's episode, I am going to be delving into Metabolism Part 3. It's going to be a nice little quick one today. We're going to get straight to the point of basically helping you now how to keep your metabolism firing if you are dieting or if you're wanting to drop body fat. The other two parts obviously touched on the damage and what can occur and the negative things to do. So if you want to go back and watch those two parts so you have a better understanding, I would recommend that. But otherwise, enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Breakthrough the Bullshit podcast. I am your host, Alice Round. I am pumped to have you here. We are going to really strip back all of the bullshit surrounding nutrition, training, fad diets, everything in the industry so that we can give you education to get the best possible results. So sit back, enjoy the ride, and let's go through all this bullshit. All right, guys, so in the last two parts of this series, so thank you so much if you have watched those parts. If not, like I said, go back and have a listen. They're really good in-depth ones about explaining metabolism, explaining what goes on in the body when we have, say, periods of metabolic downregulation. And now I'm going to talk about metabolic upregulation. So how do we make your metabolism more efficient, do less damage when you're dieting? Because the thing that people have to understand, and I hear it all the time, you hear the term metabolic damage and blah, 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 and you know, friends that I'm friends with in the industry, Lane Norton, Paul Revelia, Eric Elms, all these people and people that I've had on the show or will have on the show will say the same thing as me, and they've taught me a lot, these people. So if you don't follow them, I would definitely recommend going and having a look at some of their work. Is that, of course, metabolic downregulation is going to occur when you're dieting. Anytime you go into a caloric deficit that is less than your maintenance calories, your body will downregulate to, over time, getting used to that caloric intake. And that's the same with exercise. If you're overtraining and under-eating, over time, your body will get used to that intake and that form of training. So let's say, for example, you cut back on training and you dropped all your cardio out for a week, then of course you're going to gain weight because your body is so used to that amount of volume coming through it. And so when someone gets to a point where they're basically going to go into a caloric deficit, so let's say, for example, someone wants to diet for summer, for a holiday, for a contest prep, I would do the exact same thing with all clients in terms of figuring out where their metabolism's at. And for me, that's asking a series of questions. So if you're a coach, these are really handy questions that you can ask your clients that will give you a better understanding. Obviously, this does come with 10 years of experience, but these are some of the ones, and you'll learn how to interpret those questions. So the big ones I obviously ask is how much training they're doing. And I don't just say, oh, what session do you do at the gym? I actually want to go into detail. So I want to know how many sets they're performing, at what intensity, at what volume, how long they have been on that training regime for. Has that been the last 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks? Have they not changed it? Or are they someone that's very sporadic with their training? So they do different things every week, or do they do CrossFit? Or all of these things come into play, because anytime you've got someone that's doing like a variation every week, it's very hard to determine what kind of energy standpoint they're at. So the more specific a client is, the better. But obviously we can make an estimation at the start, give some targets, and then just roll with it from there. So I do train a few clients who are CrossFitters and people that do like F45. And I have nothing against those sports, particularly CrossFit. I think it's great if done well and programmed well. F45, on the other hand, I think there's some pros and cons to it again. But again, it comes down to the gym and the programming and the coaches. So that's really key to keep in mind with any of these sort of things. The biggest problem with them is, like I said, it's hard to quantify the work being performed unless you maybe have like a Fitbit or something that you're tracking caloric output on, which is what I do with my CrossFitters. I get them to track caloric output for their sessions for the week and then have a weekly average output, and then we factor that back in with their caloric intake and our goals for the next week. So that's a good way of doing it. But if someone that's just an avid gym goer, I generally just look at sets, volume, rep schemes, all of that, and then I'll generally start figuring out their caloric expenditure. Then I'll chat to them about their jobs, how active they are, do they walk their dogs, do they play with their kids, do they do any cardiovascular activity, all of these sort of things. And again, being specific with cardio. So I train also a few runners, and I have to know from them, what sort of Ks they're doing on a weekly basis, or just a net time, and at what sort of intensity they're running as well. Because again, all of these things are going to factor in. So for example, with an athlete, when I was a runner, we used to do more net Ks on our legs in winter, in our off season. And then we were in competition season, which is summer for athletics. It's usually November to April, May. We would do a lot less Ks, but we would do higher intensity. So it's almost like a power lifter. In the off season, you're doing more volume, and then when you're coming in, you're getting more specific, more intense. It's exactly the same across all sports in terms of how you periodize. So that's periodization. So that's the same with an athlete. So when we were sprinting, we would do less volume coming into a comp. So what I tended to do is I actually used to eat a lot more in the winter, eat a lot more carbohydrates in particular, because we were doing a lot of long runs, trail runs, as opposed to when we were actually in comp season. It was more sprints and explosive work and gym work. So tended to actually up the protein intake a little bit, and more taper the carbs coming into a contest. And I love working with athletes. It's one of my favorite things nutritionally, to see the impact that nutrition has on athletic performance. And I wish that I knew more about it when I first got into athletics, because I was definitely under eating the first few years as an athlete. Definitely wasn't eating enough protein for any form of muscle growth. And so many things back then that I would change now, which I feel like would really enhance my performance. And I think that, any high-level elite athletes need to have some form of nutritional coaching, because it can aid you so much more than what people think. Making sure that you're actually eating enough is one of the big ones. I find that when I work with a lot of athletes, they're under-eating, specifically usually carbohydrates, and they tend to overeat more fats and protein, which for some of them isn't as optimal, depending on, again, what sport they're doing, if they need to make a weight class, all these sort of things. Anyway, going back to metabolism, because I said it would be a short one today. So what do we do if you're in this, say you're an athlete, or you're prepping for a powerlifting comp, or whatever it is, or bodybuilding, or just your sexy summer body? What do you do to assure that you don't kick the shit out of your metabolism literally when you are dieting? All right, so there's a few things. Obviously, let's say, for example, we've already built the metabolism in an off season, or this person's on a reasonably good caloric intake coming into the cut. First things first, we want to create a deficit to start. We don't want it to be too aggressive that it drops the person on their ass, but then we also don't want it to be so subtle that the body doesn't notice the change. So, dropping from being on, say, 2,500 calories straight down to like 1,500 would be way too aggressive. But dropping from, say, 2,500 to 2,400 might not be aggressive enough for the body to actually feel that result, again, unless you're increasing output. So what I tend to do when I begin with a client is you don't need to change too many variables. So first up, just drop one variable. You either drop caloric intake or you increase expenditure. So more exercise or more cardio, whatever it is. It might just be more volume with their training. So you don't need to change two at the one time. You can start with just one and then see how they respond. And every week or wherever your check-in process is, you're monitoring that response. And they're making small tweaks. So let's say, for example, the next week they didn't drop after cutting their calories. Then I might increase their training to 5 days a week instead of 4, or anything like that that's going to increase output. So that might be another 500-600 calories in output, plus obviously post-exercise induced thermogenesis. So we're going to create a nice deficit there. All right, so what happens if we keep chipping away? So we keep adding more. We keep adding more training or adding more cardio, adding more volume, and chipping away calories. Eventually we're going to hit sticking points. So we're going to get to points where calories are getting quite low and training volume is getting very, very high, and this person's getting burnt out. So what I would do is look for signs of fatigue. So if a client often is not hungry, that's actually a warning sign there. If they're not hungry, that is something that I'll look for, because it generally means that maybe their leptin's dropped, their metabolism's starting to slow down. They're not hungry, not sleeping well, they're sore and not recovering well from training, their lifts are decreasing. All of these things are signs that maybe their metabolism's getting a little bit slowed down and sluggish, and I'll tend to then make a call there whether we change. So whether we go to something like carb cycling is a really, really good one, or whether we throw in a refeed once a week, or whether we throw in a refeed twice a week, or whether we have a complete diet break. So they generally are some of my favorite things to do if I've already done stuff like nutrient timing and different factors around their actual breakdown of their macronutrients. So they are three really, really handy things to utilize if you are feeling like your metabolism is getting beaten into the ground. So in terms of those, there's different ways you can do them. Obviously with carb cycling, the whole premises of that is that you're reducing carbohydrate intake for an amount of days that can be determined by the individual. Most studies have shown anywhere from 2 to 5 days in a carbohydrate depletion can be really, really optimal. It doesn't mean that you need to drop them out completely. It's just meaning that you're reducing them compared to what they normally are. What I tend to do with my clients is I go anywhere from half them to 2/3 of their intake. So let's say, for example, they were on 200 grams of carbohydrates every day of the week. I might drop them down to maybe 125 to 150 on their low carbohydrate days. But then we might be throwing in a high carbohydrate day every 3rd to 5th day. And that might be a case of then generally I'll double the carbohydrates or even more. So then it might be a day on 250 grams of carbohydrates. And generally on the high carb day, I have a higher caloric intake overall. I do tend to drop fats down a little bit, but generally speaking, it will be a higher caloric day. So that's a really good way of basically getting your body to utilize fat stores more by depleting glycogen down a little bit. Again, we're not completely depleting it. On some, carb cycling that I do with clients when we get closer to shows, the carbs are then getting quite low on some of those days, under 100 grams for some of my female competitors, that sort of thing. But I'm never really the coach that enjoys completely pulling carbohydrates out, because I feel like they're really, really vital for your training and also your brain function, your day-to-day activity. So then the high carb days, again, will generally be a lot lower fat. So it's basically a way of depleting it, getting your body to run more efficiently on burning fat stores during the day, depleting glycogen out, and then having a day to replenish the body, also reboot the metabolism a little bit, so to speak, and spike some leptin levels as well with that high carb intake. So that is one method that you can use. And again, you don't need to sometimes even drop calories overall. I look at the caloric average for the week when I'm doing that with a client comparative to what they were having before. So you don't want your high carb days so high that it actually pushes your caloric average for the week way over. You want to probably reduce the low days a little bit. So another one is having refeeds or free meals or cheat meals, whatever you want to call them. I'm not a massive fan of the term cheat meal. I just think that it promotes binge eating, it promotes eating crap food, and it promotes all the things that you shouldn't really be about if you're someone that's getting into health and fitness. Now, by all means, I don't mean, well, you shouldn't go eat a pizza or a scoop of ice cream. I mean, just eat within a normal portion of a normal person. There's no need to ever go and eat, 2 whole pizzas and a tub of Ben & Jerry's and, a tray of donuts and feel completely sick and bloated. Your digestive system goes to crap. Your training goes to crap for a few days. And you've just kind of gone backwards with all the hard work that you've just done. There is really no studies that I've read that show that there's a benefit from that kind of binge eating behavior. So I guess what I'm saying is I prefer to use the term free meals or refeeds. Refeeds tend to be a more structured overfeeding, where I'll actually give the client targets to hit and have specific goals around that. Whereas with a free meal, I'll just be encouraging the client to go and eat out, enjoy a meal, don't track it, eat mindfully, but obviously encouraging the client not to binge eat and just choose a normal size meal. And that's why I generally ask the client to go out for a meal, because often if you're at home, you'll tend to just pick at the cupboards and start grabbing at things, and it can be hard mentally for some clients, but again, some are completely fine with that as well. And having one high day a week when you've been on such a low caloric intake can also be a really good way of rebooting the metabolism. And then the last one is having diet breaks, which I did discuss a bit more, I think, in part 1. So head back and watch that. But diet breaks are obviously a period where you're actually having maybe a week or 2 or even more where you're actually kind of reverse dieting and increasing your caloric intake in quite an aggressive manner, to reboot again where you are from a metabolic standpoint, bring your calories up, give your body some feeding so your body doesn't feel like it's set in starvation mode anymore, so that when you do then drop calories, if you have to, it tends to respond a lot better on higher intakes. So they are 3 of the big things that I tend to use. If you haven't used them, then do a little bit more research on those. I don't recommend just jumping in and giving it a try. But I really hope that helps anyone that's coaching out there, anyone that's listening. And obviously there's other little sneaky methods that I have up my sleeve for when we hit plateaus with coaching. And that's what coaching's all about at the end of the day. For me, when I'm coaching a client, it's not how fast I can get to an end result. It's not how fast I can get someone lean. It's how I can do it in a healthy fashion, not completely screw up their metabolism, and look after them, basically. So if you're hiring a coach, make sure that you're looking out for that. They're looking after your health first, and then putting, obviously, your goals almost second a little bit to your health, but obviously still having them as a high importance in getting you to your goal, because obviously that's why you're paying a coach, but making sure that you're both on the same page with realistic goals as well. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this quick little episode. And if you have any questions, I am always, on the email reply. You can send them through to info@aliceround.com. And my breakthrough program at the moment, which we coach metabolism, we coach nutrition, we coach training, we also coach mindset. I have a mindset coach on board for it. He's an NLP practitioner and amazing, and has been doing a fantastic job with the program thus far, along with other coaches and myself. It's pretty crazy the results these women are getting. We are basically pushing more food in. They are losing body fat. They are training less, but training properly. And just the overall vibe of it has just been insane. So if you do have any questions about the program, we'll be having another intake. Next week is our next intake. So from, I think, April 20th, there is a couple of spots left. And for those listening to the podcast, I am offering up a one-time price. Basically, it's only going to be $900 if you mention this when you send through an email. And that covers you for 6 months of the program, which is pretty crazy. There is content every single day, so it is huge. I've put years into this, and it's a pretty amazing offer. So if you do want to jump on that, be sure to send me an email, info@aliceround.com, and I can get someone to jump on a call with you and chat to you about it and give you a few more details to check if you're going to be a good fit for it. And we'll be nice and transparent about you with that as well, and make sure that it fits your goals. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. If you have any topics you want me to cover, flick me an email, comment on this, and I will chat to you soon. Thank you for listening to another episode of Breakthrough the Bullshit. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes. Let me know, comment what you'd love to see more of, and be sure you've also subscribed on YouTube and iTunes for updates. And if you'd like more info, then you can also add the Team Round Support Facebook page, which is available to access for all of you, and you just simply need to search for it on Facebook.